3 days ago, we told you about a magnitude 7.3 earthquake that struck off the coast of Mexico, triggering tsunami warnings across multiple countries and shaking buildings from Mexico City to El Salvador. At the time, the U.S. Geological Survey's own automated damage assessment said significant damage was likely and that some fatalities were possible. 6 million people experienced moderate to strong shaking. And this was, by every early indicator, shaping up to be a major disaster. So today, we're going back to Chiapas, Guatemala, and El Salvador to answer the question everyone's been asking: what actually happened? Because the real outcome of this earthquake teaches us something important about how modern earthquake science works, and it is not the story most people expect. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the science, and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever been in an earthquake that turned out less severe than you expected? Tell me where you were and what it felt like. If you want to be the first to know every time something major happens geologically, subscribe to the channel right now. It is completely free. A thumbs up also helps enormously. Let's go for 5,000 likes on this one so the algorithm actually shows it to the people who need to see it. Thank you. Now, let's get into it. What the early warning actually said. Let's start by being precise about what was predicted, because this matters for understanding what came next. When the magnitude 7.3 earthquake struck at 10:58 a.m. Eastern Time on July 17, 2026, USGS's automated pager system, the tool that estimates likely casualties and economic impact within minutes of any major earthquake worldwide, flagged that significant damage was likely and that fatalities were possible. This wasn't alarmism. Pager bases these estimates on the earthquake's magnitude, depth, population density near the epicenter, and known building vulnerability in the region. Given that the quake struck at a shallow depth, roughly 9 to 15 kilometers depending on which agency's revised measurement you look at, and that USGS specifically flagged mud wall and adobe block construction in the region as particularly vulnerable, a serious warning was the responsible call to make in those first critical minutes. At the same time, the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center issued warnings across Mexico and Guatemala, with an advisory extending down the coast to Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, and Peru. Local tsunami. Waves of 1 to 3 feet were forecast near the epicenter. Government buildings emptied out in Guatemala City. Offices evacuated. In Tapachula, the main city on Mexico's southern border, residents described the shaking starting mild and then gradually intensifying, a pattern that, according to witnesses, made the earthquake feel even more frightening because of how long it lasted. What actually happened? On the ground. Here's where the story takes a turn most people don't expect. Across all 3 countries, Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador, authorities did not report any severe damage or casualties. Not zero impact, but nowhere near the scale the early pager assessment had flagged as plausible. In Mexico, the government's response was detailed and specific. Mexico's Secretary of the Navy, Raimundo Pedro Morales Angeles, stated directly that there were no major issues in the country following the quake, describing the damage as not serious. Officials did confirm some real, if minor, impacts. At least 4 people were injured in Chiapas State. Emergency crews responded to isolated gas leaks, a handful of collapsed walls, detached ceiling panels, and cracks in some structures, the kind of damage you'd expect from a strong shake, but not the kind that produces mass casualties. Oaxaca's governor, Salomon Jara Cruz, said the earthquake was felt with moderate intensity. In the state capital, with no significant damage reported there either. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum confirmed no deaths in the country. In Guatemala, President Bernardo Arévalo stated plainly that there were no deaths. The earthquake frightened residents specifically because of its duration, sending people pouring into the streets in Guatemala City during the middle of rush hour at the start of the workday, but authorities did not report severe structural damage or casualties in the country. In El Salvador, the pattern was the same. Buildings shook, people evacuated as a precaution, but no major damage or deaths were reported. The tsunami threat itself, tracked closely by the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, was declared past within hours, with officials noting that sea level fluctuations might continue briefly, but pose no serious ongoing danger. Total confirmed toll across the entire multi-country event. A handful of minor injuries, isolated structural damage, and 0 confirmed deaths. Why the gap between prediction and outcome matters? This is genuinely one of the more important stories in earthquake science right now, and it's worth explaining clearly rather than just noting it happened. USGS's pager system is deliberately built to communicate a range of plausible outcomes within minutes of an earthquake, not a single certain prediction. It exists because in the immediate aftermath of a major quake, before any ground reports come in, Emergency planners, governments, and international aid organizations need some kind of framework to start mobilizing resources. Better to over-prepare in the first hour based on solid statistical modeling than to under-respond and lose critical time. What determined the actual far less severe outcome here comes down to a combination of factors that Pager's initial automated estimate can account for only partially. First, the epicenter was offshore, roughly 30 miles southwest of the town of Aquiles Cerdan, meaning the most violent shaking dissipated somewhat over that distance of open water and coastline before reaching the most densely populated inland areas. Second, and this is the factor regional officials specifically credited, building standards and emergency preparedness in this part of Mexico and Central America have measurably improved over the past several decades. Mexico, in particular, has invested heavily in seismic building codes since the catastrophic 1985. Mexico City earthquake, a disaster that killed thousands and permanently reshaped how the country approaches earthquake-resistant construction. Third, this region experiences frequent seismic activity, meaning both infrastructure and emergency response systems get tested regularly rather than facing a rare, unfamiliar event. This is not the first time this pattern has happened. If this outcome sounds familiar, that's because we've discussed almost the exact same dynamic on this channel before, just with the opposite result. When we covered the twin earthquakes that struck Venezuela on June 24th, magnitude 7.2 and 7.5 tremors. Within less than a minute of each other, the actual outcome was catastrophic. Thousands of confirmed deaths, tens of thousands more missing, and widespread building collapse. Venezuela's earthquakes and this week's Mexico-Guatemala earthquake were similar in magnitude and both involved shallow, high-energy ruptures. But the outcomes were dramatically different, and the reason comes back to the same lesson we keep returning to on this channel. The magnitude of an earthquake tells you how much energy was released. It does not tell you, on its own, how many people will be hurt. Building codes, construction quality, government preparedness, and the specific geography between the rupture and the nearest population centers determine that far more than the number on the seismograph. Mexico and Guatemala's relatively mild outcome from a 7.3 earthquake this week, and Venezuela's catastrophic outcome from a similarly sized earthquake sequence in June are, in a real sense, the same scientific lesson taught twice in one summer, once by tragedy and once by relief. What do the aftershocks tell us? USGS recorded at least 10 aftershocks in the hours following the main shock, ranging between magnitude 4.9 and 6.0, with some reports counting at least 5 aftershocks between magnitude 5.1 and 6 in the earliest hours specifically. Multiple magnitude 5 plus aftershocks following a major earthquake is a completely normal part of how these sequences unfold as the surrounding fault. System adjusts to the stress redistribution caused by the main rupture. What matters is that none of these aftershocks were reported to have caused additional significant damage, which further supports the picture of a region whose infrastructure held up reasonably well under sustained, repeated shaking rather than just a single event. Scientists monitoring the Cocos Plate subduction zone, the same tectonic boundary responsible for this earthquake, will continue watching this sequence for any unusual continuation of aftershock activity in the coming weeks, though at this point the sequence is behaving the way seismologists would expect for an event of this size and type. The real takeaway. For viewers, it would be easy to look at this outcome and conclude the initial warnings were overblown, but that reading misses the actual lesson here. The early Pager assessment was appropriately cautious, given what was known in the first minutes after the quake. Shallow depth, high magnitude, 6 million people in the shaking zone, and documented vulnerable construction types in parts of the region. Government evacuations in Guatemala City, tsunami warnings issued within minutes across 8 countries, and emergency protocols activated in Mexico were all the correct response to that level of initial uncertainty. The fact that the actual outcome turned out significantly better than the worst-case range isn't evidence that the system overreacted. It's evidence that rapid evacuation, decades of seismic building investment, and a region with genuine earthquake experience can measurably change the outcome of a dangerous natural event, even when that event is large enough to trigger warnings across an entire coastline. Final thought. 3 days ago, this earthquake had every early indicator of becoming a major regional disaster. Today, the confirmed outcome is a handful of injuries, some cracked walls, and 0 deaths across 3 countries. That gap between what was possible and what actually happened is not luck. It's the product of specific, traceable decisions, building codes strengthened after past tragedies, emergency, systems that activated quickly, and a coastal geography that gave the most violent shaking distance to dissipate before reaching the most populated areas. We saw the opposite outcome in Venezuela just weeks earlier, and the comparison between the 2 events is one of the clearest real-world demonstrations available right now of how much human preparation shapes the human cost of a geological event that nature delivers with no regard for which country it strikes. We will keep tracking every major seismic and volcanic story as it develops, including any longer-term updates out of this region. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And leave that comment below. Have you ever been in an earthquake that turned out less severe than you feared? Tell me where and what it felt like. 5,000 likes on this video. Let's go. See you in the next one.